What is the difference between a fiddle and a Nyckelharpa? Well, they are different instruments, of course. They don't look the same, they are not played the same, and they don't exactly have the same technical possibilities. Yet they are very close in sound. Many people have mostly heard a violin in their life, or when we talk about folk music, we tend to call it fiddle. But even for people who do listen to Scandinavian folk music and have heard quite a few Nyckelharpas, it's not always easy to tell them apart when we talk about sound. So today I'm here to help you. Here are 5 tips to differentiate the sound of these two instruments. Difference number 1, the clicking of the keys. Unlike the violin, where you put your fingers directly on the string, Nyckelharpa has wooden keys that you press onto the string. They serve the same purpose, to shorten the vibrating length of a string to change its pitch and therefore play melodies. But the big difference is that the keys are really making noise, and that's one of the main telltale signs of a Nyckelharpa. Then it depends quite a bit on the type of recording you are listening to. If it's solo, you will have in general more of all the little noises that are part of an instrument's sound. Whereas if it's a bigger ensemble, even already a duo, but the bigger the ensemble, the less you're gonna hear the very particular little, almost parasitic noises of each instrument, including the clicking of the Nyckelharpa keys. So sometimes you will be able to tell, oh, this is a Nyckelharpa, I hear the keys very clearly, and sometimes you just won't hear them because they were lost in all the other sounds from all the other instruments. Difference number 2, the resonance. The Nyckelharpa has a feature which are its resonance strings. These are tiny strings that you don't actually play on, but they resonate with every note you play on your melody strings. It's them who give the Nyckelharpa its very broad and generous sound. There are a few violin-shaped instruments that do have resonance strings, for example the viola d'amore or the hardingfele, but regular violins do not have resonance strings, and therefore they do not have that extra resonance. Again, this is not gonna be very audible if the Nyckelharpa is playing with lots of other instruments. And also, the place and settings of recording the instrument are going to make the resonance very easy to hear or not at all. So a violin playing in a church will sound more resonant than a Nyckelharpa played outdoors. Because outdoors the sound just evaporates into the big air. So that difference is not 100%. You have to be a little bit careful about listening. Oh, there is resonance. It's a Nyckelharpa. No, not always. And there are also lots of people who add resonance in post. So you record music and then you can add what is called reverb. And nowadays we live in an era where people are crazy about reverb. There are some bands that use so much reverb on pretty much every instrument that our ears have become quite used to reverb. I personally prefer a more natural sound, so on Nyckelharpa I don't want to add reverb because it already has its natural reverb, you don't need it. And on fiddles I like to have more of their grit, and yes, they might sound a little bit dry without reverb. You can add maybe a little bit just to smoothen a little bit, but you don't need tons. If you want more resonance, play in a church or play the Nyckelharpa. There are always good reasons to play the Nyckelharpa. Difference number 3. The Nyckelharpa has no E string. Nowadays there are actually models of Nyckelharpa called the Fiddle harpas that do have an E string, but traditionally the highest Nyckelharpa string is an A. The same as the second string on a violin. And the idea is that instead of going one string higher like on a violin, you will climb in the keyboard because your E is there. That's the E of the fiddle. So not having an E string doesn't really change the possibilities of the Nyckelharpa, but it means that you will not hear the E string. And there are a lot of Scandinavian folk tunes that have a lot of E string as a decoration, an ornament, which you can only play if you have an E string, aka a fiddle. Of not having an E string also means that there is one more thing that you can spot just with your ears when listening to a Nyckelharpa. It's the fact that because you climb on the A string to reach the same heights as the fiddle on its E string, your A string is used by your melody. And therefore, the A is not available. And that open A string on fiddle is very commonly used as, again, an ornament. But on Nyckelharpa, if you are playing high in a melody, you will not be able to have much of the open A. Maybe here and there when you have time, but most of the time your fingers will be doing something up there and the A string will not be available. So that's something you can spot in recordings. If the melody goes high and there is no open A, but maybe a lower string, which is the next string on the Nyckelharpa, here a D, it's a good telltale sign that it's actually a Nyckelharpa you're hearing and not a violin. Difference number 4, the impossible pizzicato. So pizzicato is a technique that is possible both on violin and Nyckelharpa. Swedish and Norwegian folk music, we have a lot of those left-hand pizzicatos that we execute very quickly while playing the melody with the bow. These are just impossible to play on the Nyckelharpa, because your left hand just doesn't have access to the strings like on a violin. You have the keys in between, and your arm is not long enough to go around the keys. So you cannot really do left-hand pizzicato. You cannot have quick pizz in the middle of a melody. You can have a part that is pizzicato and then you use usually your right hand. Or you could have also pizz on the left hand, but not quickly while you are playing melodies on the keys. It's just not possible. So if you hear this kind of quick pizzicato in the middle of a melody, you know it cannot be a Nyckelharpa. Difference number 5. The texture of the sound. And this one is the hardest one to actually learn to recognize. It takes practice, but I'm still including it here because it seems pretty obvious when we're talking about instruments. If you are not very used to listening to, for example, a flute and a violin, they have a similar range and you will not be able to tell the difference at once. But very quickly, when you have listened to a few and maybe you have seen a few concerts, you hear, oh, this is a flute, I can hear the breathing, and it has this distinctive tone of a flute. This is a violin, it has another type of tone, it has the bow sound, it has a different texture. Even if they are playing exactly the same thing, you will be able to tell them apart, just due to their voice, if you want. And later on, if you listen to a lot of winds, for example, you would also be able to tell the difference between an oboe and a flute, and even later on between an oboe and a clarinet, and so on. You will be able to tell more and more difference while you get used to the voice of that instrument. And well, it's just the same with violin and Nyckelharpa. If you have listened to a lot of both instruments, you will be able to hear the distinctive grit of the bow of a fiddle and how it differs from the texture of a Nyckelharpa bow. And also this depends a lot on the musicians and their instruments. You will have instruments that are way closer in sound, despite being a Nyckelharpa and a fiddle, whereas others will be very far apart. So let's hear how the difference in tone and texture sounds when I play my two instruments. What do you think? Is it easier now for you to differentiate between these two instruments? Practice a bit with different recordings of Scandinavian folk music that you can find. Try to analyze which instrument it is, or maybe it's both. There are many bands with both instruments. And next video will be a quiz for you to test if you can actually differentiate between these two, just with your ears. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell if you want to be notified about the next video coming out. Consider supporting me on Patreon. link in the description below if you like this kind of content. Big thank you to my patrons, by the way. And I will see you in the next video. Hej då!